Who are you?
Hi, my name is Liberty.
And I'm Sean.
We were in a Jubilee video.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that the format that the interview process took and also the editing of the video left a lot to be desired in terms of substance. No offense to Jubilee, I know what they were trying to do. They're trying to make a feel-good video about people from different ideologies coming together. If you manufacture compromise artificially through editing and leading questions, I don't think that's much of compromise worth having.
It managed to, I think, make a difference in some of the other videos. I think we just come from very different worldviews.
You're talking about reconciling worldviews versus getting to recognize that a person on one side or the other is a human being.
Right.
I recognize that you're a human being, but that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about this video making the conflict between socialism and capitalism to be something that either doesn't exist or just doesn't matter. I'd like to at least go into some of this stuff more.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about this, because I think a big problem was with a lot of the terms they used was definition. Yeah, and we were probably arguing past each other about, because we had different definitions of what each of our sides were.
Totally. Okay, I define capitalism as a laissez-faire market with an emphasis on property rights.
And how would you define socialism?
Normally, when I'm talking about socialism, I'm talking about government controlling the means of production, though I recognize that you were talking about workers owning the means of production.
Mm-hmm. That's not a bastardization of Marx. That is the original understanding of it. It's a democratic process whereby the workers control the means of production. When I say capitalism, I mean a situation where anyone but the workers, where there's a hierarchy in the workplace that is inherently harmful.
Manual laborers are at the
not
bottom
just
of the
not
hierarchy.
just manual laborers. I mean, there's all
including
sorts of
desk jobs,
including desk jobs,
right,
where there is a hierarchy and someone is receiving profit because of the work of people who are working for them. Yeah, I don't think that profit is a coherent or good concept.
Right. That comes to one of the core discrepancies between our worldviews, which is that I don't think people will work without profit. Profit is a signifier of where need is in a capitalist worldview. So being able to have incentives to create what the world wants is one of the benefits of capitalism. I don't know what everyone else wants, because my wants will be different from theirs. But, I see a help wanted sign in the window. I know that there is demand in the market for someone to wash dishes at this place, and it's worth about however much an hour to them.
So you said profit is an indication of where needs are, right? Then how come there are so many needs not being met by capitalism right now? Very basic human needs like health, security, food security, shelter, stuff like that.
Health and shelter are not very free markets in the U.S. right now. They're heavily regulated in ways that I think impede their ability to help others. And also, some 99% of the population is housed. No? What percentage of the population is housed?
There are lots of people who have housing insecurity that are not necessarily homeless. They aren't necessarily out on the street, but they do go from couch to couch.
I think it's a beautiful thing that in human history we've moved from a great deal of homelessness to home insecurity.
And you attribute that to capitalism?
I do. Because, where there's money to be made, let's say people want housing, even if they want cheap housing, they just want a home, someone will provide that for them. It might be really cheap and shitty.
But there are people who want cheap housing and a home isn't provided for them.
Right now, it's hard to get a home. I mean, with rent control, no one really moves out when they have another option.
I mean, I drove here today. There are tons of empty luxury apartment buildings in Los Angeles.
That's the thing. Luxury apartment buildings aren't as regulated because, they want to keep the cheaper housing affordable. They feel like, the luxury apartment's just for the rich, so we're not going to help the rich.
How is a homeless person going to pay for a luxury apartment?
The only reason there's so many luxury apartments is because in regular housing and regular apartments, there's less money to be made. So now you just have this huge gap. You have shitty apartments or luxury apartments, and more and more people are going into luxury apartments. I know this one landlady who is like, I can't make back the money in apartments anymore because of rent control. I'm thinking about tearing them down and putting in luxury apartments because they're not controlled, because they're the rich, so who cares?
So you're saying that if rent control wasn't a thing, there would be more affordable housing?
I do think that. Because then they wouldn't leave the market of affordable housing, because there was money to be made there.
Why not just make more housing that is affordable without having to worry about whether it will make you a profit. If you're not worried about making a profit, then
I stand by my claim that people aren't going to do it for no profit. No one has a
I think
passion for landlording. Tenants are terrible.
I feel like that is feeding into my point, at least. You said profit is indicative in a capitalist society of where need is, and it sounds like there's a need that's not being met by profit.
Because of regulation.
But if you didn't regulate it,
then there would be profit to be made.
Okay, so people who are poor can't afford housing, or like an apartment rent.
Right now, yes, that's true.
Yes. So,
if rent wasn't controlled, rent wouldn't be as high. That is what I'm claiming. There would be at least apartments that weren't as high rent.
What kind of conditions would those apartments be in?
They wouldn't be their best, probably.
Rent control was instituted as a way for people who are low income to not be kicked out of their homes whenever prices go up too high.
If there is a need for affordable housing, then someone would probably come and build affordable housing.
But if it's for poor people, there's not a profit to be made out of that.
It might be a small profit. There's definitely a profit to be made
off of poor people. This is something that I thought about a lot afterwards, especially after reading comments people had posted about like, oh, Sean is so stupid. He thinks that kids aren't selfish. And another technicality, I would have to say, yeah, kids are selfish. There are essentially three arguments that are being made in this session that surrounded this question. That human beings are inherently selfish, and we can prove that in three ways. Look at children before they've been acculturated, look at societies throughout history, look at animals. Mm-hmm. And I would have to say, yes, all three of those things can be proven to be selfish, but they can also be proven to be empathetic, almost to the same, if not a more degree. Ants, pack animals, they're extremely cooperative. You look at Paleolithic societies, and archaeological research has been done into that these were extremely egalitarian societies, and the introduction of agriculture created class hierarchy. You look at children and child psychology studies that have shown that they are amazing at empathizing with things human, animal, non-sentient. Just their capacity for empathy is incredible. Children are selfish, but they are also incredibly empathetic, and I think whether or not a human being is one or the other, or whether human beings in general are one or the other, is beside the point. How human beings have been throughout history, regardless of whether it's empathetic or selfish, is not as much of an important question as how human beings should be.
And I completely agree with pretty much everything you said.
Okay.
I don't know, it's kind of interesting. When I think of capitalism, I kind of think as humans voluntarily working together. I know frequently there are plenty of people who feel very put upon by having to work, but we can do the I-pencil example by a guy named Leonard E. Reed, and he just tells the story of a single pencil, the humble pencil, and how it could not have been constructed if not for the ore miners who got the thing for the little metal tip, and the rubber people who made the little eraser, and the lumberjacks with the wood and whatever graphite is. So I kind of look at the things capitalism has allowed us to create and think like, wow, that's so many people working together, yes, for profit, but to create something bigger than the sum of its parts.
You know, let's say you go to Norway and you spend time there where the people see the collective good as tied into their own.
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying like, oh, Mimi, this is a really stupid point. They are a capitalist society. He is aware of that.
Yeah. He said before the part that they cut out.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Even though this is a capitalist thing, but it is a more socially conscious sort of society, and this is an example of that, not a perfect example of society.
We have different ideas of what good is. And by that, I did mean like any kind of diversity. Each person is diverse in their own way sometimes, and we have very subjective goals and ideas of what we should be working towards, ethnically diverse or otherwise.
Was that a response to Mimi?
That was a response to Mimi.
People from diverse perspectives can't work together for their own common good?
Not what I'm saying. But if you and I were to work together to make the world a better place, we would burn the world down because we disagree so strongly.
You have all these research labs trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to figure out this process. What's the most efficient way to do this? I think we need more of that sort of sense of competition.
The health research example is a good one in terms of like a place where people are intrinsically motivated towards doing that activity. Like people do have an intrinsic motivation to cure diseases and stuff like that. That's not a place where the market necessarily or historically has made things better. Pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies and things like that that have made access to healthcare more difficult because of financial barriers.
I know there are definitely some who take advantage of like patents to make it so that no one else can develop their drug.
Or so that they can mark up the price of a drug by
Right.
600%.
Right. Technically, patenting is government enforcement, but that's a little more anarchist. So,
Do you think that patents serve a purpose in a capitalist society? Do you think it's a beneficial thing towards capitalism?
I'm actually not sure where I fall on that. It can be really detrimental, like you said. Like, it's pretty easy to make an EpiPen. More and more people know how now, but even like a person separately coming to the same conclusion can't make it because it's patented, which actually drives out competition. You can't have two EpiPen companies.
Right, but isn't the idea behind a patent is that you have the incentive to make that invention in the first place so that you can profit off of it?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm thinking like maybe profiting off of things is not a good incentive to do things.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that argument too, and I kind of see where they're coming from. So I'm actually not sure where I fall on that.
Okay.
That you're willing to continue to throw out the same talking points that have failed people so miserably. Again, it's a benefit to us.
I think that particular cut made Mimi look like a lot more of an asshole than he was. He was responding more to what Jack and Richard had been saying about, like, if you're better, then you're going to get paid more, stuff like that.
That is what we believe.
Can you understand why that would be a phrasing that turns off a lot of people? Because there are all sorts of people who are not being paid a lot, who I would say are incredible people. And even maybe good at their jobs, or even would be good at other jobs if they had the educational or financial opportunities to gain those jobs. So that's really more what he was responding to there. It made it seem like he was responding to...
See, you actually explained what your issue with what we were saying was. I had no idea what he was even referring to. He just came down, sat down, and was like, well, thank God you guys are stupid. Which is basically what he was saying. Like, thank you for actually explaining what he might have been responding to.
Yeah.
You can ask any creative. Competition leads less to excellence and more towards doing whatever you can to edge past.
Immediately after saying that, I was afraid people were going to comment to this because I had just been talking about the Beach Boys. Famously, Brian Wilson framed his creation of Pet Sounds as a response to Rubber Soul, and then the Beatles framed Sgt. Pepper's as a reaction to Pet Sounds. I think there's a difference between being inspired by something and seeing yourself
And
as in competition with it. Yeah, and I think that applies to a lot more areas of life than just creative pursuits too.
I see that. Overall, I sort of think that part of your worldview is, or rather, your worldview is true in part, and then there's also the other part, like monetary incentives and competition. If you are a baker by trade and you love baking, that's fantastic, and you might be inspired by other bakers. Beautiful. And you also, on top of that, might want to be able to get more money to your bakery, so you try out a new cupcake recipe that you wouldn't have otherwise, because cupcakes are really in right now. A bit of both.
My problem with capitalism is some people are well off enough to not have to worry about their job security. They don't have to worry about keeping up ahead of the curve of cost of living. But in a capitalist economy, there are going to be bakeries, startup bakeries, that are going to have to choose between a creative expression of their bakeryness and doing something that they can guarantee will make a profit to stay in business. That's a choice I don't believe people should have to make. People respond to that a lot of times when it's a conversation about socialism, like, well, how are you going to get people to do shitty jobs? I think that not just self-expression and self-realization and creative pursuits, but also altruism is a really, really good motivator for people to do things that would be beneficial to other people. I think that's the thing that would supplant competition in a capitalist society.
I see that.
Does that sound really naive?
No, I think it made me aware of maybe some personality differences between people who like socialism and people who like capitalism. I think any of my capitalist friends, if you ask them to dig a ditch for the good of society, they would probably kick you.
I want to make just a declaration right now that I think is really important when you're having a discussion with someone that you disagree with, and you disagree with so vehemently, and feel in your heart and your soul, the core of your being, that they are wrong, okay?
And morally wrong. I think we both think the other person's ideology is morally...
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
That if someone comes up with an argument that you can't counter right away, it doesn't mean that your side is wrong. And that goes both ways.
Totally.
There could be an answer, and you just might not know it. And also, the worst thing is when someone does that, and then they see they have you on the ropes, and they're like, so capitulate, you know? I've proved to you that you're wrong. Now you have to immediately subscribe to my ideology. If I were talking to someone, and in the very nearly impossible chance that I ever had someone in that position, what I want to say to them is like, okay, so you don't have a response right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to straw man this. I don't want to turn you against yourself. Think about what I said. Take a week. Yeah, you don't have to capitulate to me right now. I need to confess to me or whatever.
All right, if we're talking about the United States and we're talking about financial success, then yes, I would believe so. If we're talking about the world, it doesn't necessarily have to mean financial well-being or like stability. I think that it really just means how you're happy and how you're okay with yourself. And
They kind of have a point where like success has many different definitions.
Okay, sure. I mean, that doesn't change the fact that there is a definition of success, which is financial success,
There
and
is
it's,
financial
it's
success.
inaccessible to many people because of systems that are already in place.
One thing I think I noticed people bringing up great unhappiness, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, things like that. And I think we just hit upon a point that I didn't get a chance to bring up in the filming, which is that mental illness is a scourge on the US. Like, people are really unhappy. I don't know if necessarily there are systems in place to keep them unhappy. I think it might just be that human life is suffering and we're trying to find ways to make it otherwise.
Mental illness, it's partly genetic, it's partly
Situational.
yeah. But I would agree with my comrades there that capitalism definitely contributes to that situation that is very, very bleak for many people and depressing and anxiety inducing. It is for me.
Maybe it's just the way I was acculturated. But if the socialists took over and somehow I survived, God, I would hate it.
You wouldn't like the vibe.
I wouldn't like the vibe. I wouldn't like the lack of private property.
Now, when you say private property...
Oh, that's right. Is private property is means of production being privately owned, and then personal property is anything else being privately owned?
Are there certain theorists that put a much bigger wedge between those two things? It's a grayer area for me, and I am not a theorist. But the means of production, which I assume would be considered private property under the system we have right now,
Totally.
under socialism would hopefully become publicly, I don't want to say owned, but democratically, the way that resources are allocated would be democratically for the use of manufacturing, for any sort of thing, especially as it relates to meeting basic human needs. That would be private property. Now what we're talking about, things like your Sly Stone record collection would be personal property, not in the sense that you necessarily own it in a way that you don't own other things, just that that's not something that the public needs.
How do you end up with a Sly Stone record collection without capital?
In a socialist economy, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be moved towards only meeting immediate physical needs. I think that's a misconception that exists because it seems like immediate physical needs are always in danger of not being met in our current society for a certain vulnerable sector of the population. And it just so happens that there are a ton of resources that are being hoarded by people who have a lot of wealth or access or power over resources. And those resources can be immediately reallocated to people who need them. Presumably, if you want to have a high quality of life, you're going to devote time towards things that had formerly been conceived of as luxury items or non-essential items. And I think that they're essential. I think that the ability to enjoy your life is an essential thing. And I think it's a right that people should have.
When I say someone has the right to enjoy their lives, I mean no one else may ruin their life intentionally.
But they can ruin it unintentionally?
I don't know how you would enforce that.
I think maybe our idea of which rights are negative ones maybe is something, because I think somebody who, they start a company, okay, and they hire some workers, the fact that they're paying them less than the workers need in order to pay rent. They have to get another job, it overextends them, they're going on 60 hours a week. This is not an uncommon thing. That person, the owner of that company, is in a position, because of the profits they've been raking in, to pay him or herself less and pays workers more. Mm-hmm. He has the option to do that. You would say he's not obligated to do that. I would say because the baseline by which people rise to that level of wealth is fundamentally unequal, to say that he earned the right to make that choice versus someone who just works under him, it's not possible to have earned the right to do that in relation to someone else who didn't have the same opportunities that you did.
A couple responses. One is that,
Can I go pee?
yes, you should fact check me on this. But recently, I learned that some 2% of the population is a minimum wage earner. Of those who are, some 60% move on to higher paying jobs within their first year, and some 90% are under the age of 25 and are doing them as a first job. So it really is the sort of first rung on the ladder that we often say it is. That is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
I believe you. It's still not enough. Even wages significantly higher than the federally mandated minimum wage are still not sufficient for someone to reasonably support themselves. And certainly not to support themselves in a way that allows for them to flourish as human beings. Which I think is another point, is that socialism is hoping to raise the bar for the most vulnerable people among us to a point where they can see themselves as flourishing on an equal footing with people who make more money than them. I don't know about the statistic, but I wouldn't dispute it. I would also just say that not making minimum wage doesn't mean you're making a living wage. Yeah.
You do bring up an interesting point, which is seeing yourself as equally flourishing to those who earn more. And that's kind of the interesting thing that I see a lot of, is that when I see the world, I see the fact that the minimum wage workers in the US today still live with better food options and more options around them for like even entertainment than Louis the Fourth or something. We have more choices, we have more available to us, we have electricity and indoor heating and indoor plumbing. Overall, the standard of living, or what we have access to at least, keeps going up. But I think people frequently compare themselves to those who are better off and worse off than them. And I think inequality leads people to be incredibly unhappy because we don't really look at what we have, we frequently look at what other people have. I have one car. That person has 2 cars. I've seen people with 2 cars. Why do you need so many cars? But then again, some people have no cars, so I'm better off than they are. Dude, not long ago, there weren't cars, and I couldn't get to UCLA every day. Mm-hmm. So we could think of the world that way, like, holy crap, cars are a thing. Or we can think, that person has 2 cars and does not need 2 cars. There's only one of them. That's why I think inequality can be so detrimental to people, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be. If you didn't choose to
it's a matter of mindset, whether or not you are happy in your given situation.
I do. There's the theory of the treadmill.
The
it's
hedonic treadmill,
yeah. So I do think, it is a little bit like, no matter how perfect the situation, eventually you get adjusted to it.
You said, like, we compare ourselves to those who are doing better than us and those who are doing worse than us currently. I think it's maybe fallacious to say we should compare ourselves to people who were doing worse than us in the past, and not think about how much better people could be doing under a different set of societal rules in the future.
That's a good point. Philosophy is very important in that we should always be looking to how humanity can better itself and how one can better themselves. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you are correct about that. I still think socialism sucks.
Okay. I like the idea of councils made of people from very different parts of society. Whenever you're making a governing action for one part of the economy, because it's all connected, someone from a different part of the country, world, or something like that who would be affected by it in a particular way is on that council, so that they can have a say about how those resources are allocated, because it's going to affect them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you bring up allocation of resources and councils and stuff, because I've always thought of that as the main problem with socialism, is that no council can know where all the resources are most needed. The idea of the diverse group is certainly a step toward a more socialist utopia than, the communism that's been done in the past. Like, you're right. Allocating resources to one part of the country will affect another part of the country in another market in some way. That's a lot of information.
It is a lot of information.
Can any one person effectively sort through all that information, communicate all that information, and enact on that information in a timely fashion?
Hopefully it wouldn't be one person.
Can any group of people effectively communicate all that information and enact on that information in a timely fashion? That is my main concern with socialism. My answer is no.
And my answer is that I am fairly certain that the outcome would improve the quality of life of the people receiving those resources much better than a system whereby no one is making those decisions, only the invisible hand of the market is.
The invisible hand is everyone making decisions. You go to the store, and if you want fucking eggs, if you can afford fucking eggs,
Right, if you can afford...
you buy fucking eggs.
If you can afford the
Which
eggs.
is the majority of Americans. Yes, it's not all, it's obviously not perfect. There are those who are put upon in any number of ways.
Right, but why is that not important?
It is important. It's hugely important. I don't think your solution even remotely fixes it. It's hugely important. Charity is essential. Socialism puts too much into the hands of too few, which I know you think probably capitalism does. No single entity of any sort can know where any resource needs to end up. It's just too much information. That's what the invisible hand is. It's all of that information happening all at once 1 billion times a day. Every time you buy anything. That's a lot of times. That's a lot of things.
And it's resulted in a society which I would argue poorly allocates resources. Because there are people who are in need and there are people who are in excess. Wealth inequality, not just in terms of wages, but in terms of accumulation of wages and profits, has increased so dramatically. There's anybody who is in need when there's that much excess at the top. I don't see that as a
That's a good point.
good allocation.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I recognize that capitalism is the farthest thing from perfect in allowing individuals to make choices. I mean, if nothing else, people make bad choices, but there are those who don't have the opportunities that everyone else does. Still don't think socialism will get us any closer to fixing that than capitalism ever could. I still think capitalism allocates resources better. And you'll say, but so few have so much. And to that I respond with, it's not a zero-sum game. That person having 2 cars does not prevent me from having 1.
It does if they are getting richer because of profits that would have been used to pay your wages. That exchange in itself is zero
Yeah,
sum.
but they are offering a job that pays me wages because they can get profits out of it. And now I get a job out of it. Voluntarism.
But wouldn't it be great though if you weren't forced to only choose the jobs which would garner profit?
No, because like I said, profit is where people are willing to put money.
But we talked about this at the very beginning. You said profit is indicative of where a need is, and I'm saying clearly not. Because there are needs in our society which are not met.
Being met,
Yeah.
yes. But one can still see that there's profit to be made where people are willing to pay. Yes, there are needs that are not met. I'll grant you that. And I think there are some serious time, thought, and energy and money should be put into meeting those needs. But overall, prices do show supply and demand.
Supply and demand is different than need.
Okay,
Yeah.
demand, not need. Demand and need are...
Demand can be inflated in all sorts of
correlated.
artificial ways too. And so it's not just a matter of like there's a whole category of needs which don't factor into demand. It's that demand can also be manipulated by those who are in power because of the wealth that they hold.
There's only so much they can manipulate demand before actual demand goes down. Like, you still need to make profits, and you make profits by getting people to buy your stuff. So usually it's worthwhile.
Most of the country is lower middle class and up.
That I could have said that better. That most of the country is middle class and up, because classes are relative. But I feel like I've made my point pretty clear that I think that the standard of living is pretty high in the U.S.
But we're in a capitalist system.
Where the government pays huge amounts of money
The
for the things
military.
you're talking. Yeah, I'm not in
Right.
favor of those things.
That is the point that most made me think we need to define socialism in terms of controlled by the workers, not
The government.
Yes, not the government.
And I would define capitalism as being free market, like lower taxes, less government spending, and not just republicanism.
I am with Mimi on this. I think that capitalism naturally leads to more military expenditure. It wasn't explained completely in there, but isn't it in the interest of wealthy, particularly large corporation business owners, to be continually opening up new markets abroad so that profits continue to increase, right? Isn't it?
Making contracts with the government where they buy, $1,000 bajillion jets
Right.
that the military explicitly says that they don't need.
That's cronyism, you're saying.
Cronyism,
That's
corporatism, that's definitely not laissez-faire, that's not lack of intervention.
At what point does cooperation between the government and a corporation become a matter of cronyism and not a matter of using the advantages that this accumulated capital I have is giving me?
When it involves force. The government takes our taxpayer dollars because if we don't give it to them, they'll put us in a cage. But anytime you're using force, that's not capitalism anymore. That's cronyism.
You're saying this is not an example of capitalism. This is an example of cronyism or of unholy matrimony between corporations and government. But the increase in military spending it's in the large corporations' favor because
It's in large
Yeah,
corporations' favor.
Okay,
yeah, utilizing the government for your own gain is totally in corporations' favor. I don't give a crap what's in corporations' favor.
and I don't mean just in terms of like military contracts
Yeah.
and stuff. Being able to basically have a
Invade.
dog on a leash that can threaten force against a market you want to be part of, or to actually use force against a market
Yeah.
like that.
I'm not in favor of capitalism because I give a crap about corporations. I don't think that profits are the end all be all. I think voluntarism is the end all be all. If a corporation forces you to do anything, I don't care that it's for profit.
Then what do you say to situations where what I would argue is a matter of force? People are given a limited selection of jobs that they can do and wages that they can earn because the economy is controlled by people who have a lot of wealth and power. Isn't
Right.
that force? The people in the comments kept on using this example of like a lemonade stand. Well, Sean, you're so stupid.
There's no workers in that, right? The business owners in a lemonade stand are the only workers.
That is a point I hadn't thought of, but I was thinking in terms of like, okay, so where did these kids who got the lemonade stand to get the capital for the lemonade stand? Where did they get the lemons? What were the conditions under which the lemons were harvested? What are the conditions under which people in this neighborhood have availability to lemonade? So that's kind of a facetious
Right,
one. But
gotcha.
still, like, this lemonade stand is connected to a global supply chain that is fundamentally unjust to a lot of workers.
Consider
My closing comments are, you and I are both pretty deep in our beliefs at this point. So, I don't plan on changing anytime soon. I don't know about you. I'm certainly open to it, but
Okay, good.
not likely. But I'm really glad we got along at the filming and that we chatted afterwards, because I feel like I understand socialism better. One shouldn't claim that they have an opinion if they don't even know what the other sides are. So, that's been really beneficial for me, and I'm glad I understand it better.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm a smarter and better person now.
Oh, cool. Me too. I'm glad to have been better informed in terms of the ways that you diverge from popular conservatism in your beliefs. I mean, I was probably assuming a lot of beliefs that you had, even though you don't necessarily subscribe to those.
And also, I think what I really realized was where we diverge in terms of our worldviews, which has been really nice, because I do think that socialist ideology is evil, but I know that given your view of the world, it makes perfect sense, and, like, you're a good person.
Can I ask, according to your view of the world, why is it evil? Because it forces people to
Yeah.
not be able to make as much money as they'd like to?
It will forcibly take private property. And I think ultimately would end in shorter lifespans.
I do not believe in private property as a concept. I don't believe it's just. The idea that someone has earned the money that they have or the things that they have is one that's predicated on believing that there's such thing as people who bring themselves up by their bootstraps, or people who are self-made and things like that. And I don't believe that anyone ever has been self-made. I believe that it is evident that people benefit from social relations, and no one has ever lived or created something in terms of profit or gained more wealth than another person without having benefited from society, benefited from the circumstances of their birth, benefited from historical processes and systems that were in place long before they ever existed. And I'm glad that May mentioned this at the end of the video, that I believe capitalism its roots are intertwined. I won't say it's not based on racism, but its roots are intertwined with racism, sexism, colonialism, imperialism. Because these things existed by the time that capitalism came onto the stage, and capitalism has not addressed the root of any of those problems, people who are born white, or people who are born male, or people who are born heteronormative, because the social system is such, and they already are born into a position of privilege, they are going to continue to be the wealthiest people, and they're going to continue to have the power because capitalism rewards these systems that have been in place already.
I see that and look forward to thinking on it more.
Okay.
I think I'm getting
Yeah.
it. So there were like inequalities, and then capitalism came about,
And
it
it's just
just made it so
exacerbating
that.
those inequalities.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of what I see as addressing and finally bringing justice to the problem of racism or sexism is abolishing capitalism, for me.
Yeah. I see that. It's been so long since racism and sexism were as obviously inherent in like our legal system. There are still places where it runs rampant, but it's not as black and white that most attempts to rectify it, I don't know if they can be done in an ethical and even way without just taking from one and giving to another, which isn't perfectly equal because there are white males who immigrated here, so they didn't have all that capital to begin with.
I'm not suggesting that we redistribute all wealth from white people to black people.
We just redistribute the wealth, period.
Yes. Yeah. You feel good?
Yeah, I do.
I feel better.